Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is the secret doctrine we are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material and the link for my book, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the secret doctrine with Archaic Teachings in the Puranas and Genesis, Physical Evolution. The writer cannot give too much proof that the system of cosmogony and anthropogeny as described actually existed, that its records are preserved, and that it is found mirrored in even the modern versions of ancient scriptures. Why not? Why can you not give me proof? Why can you not say, hey, here is my source material that I pulled from in particular? It is well established that I am not a fan of secret knowledge. The Puranas, on the one hand, and the Jewish scriptures on the other, are based on the same scheme of evolution, which, read esoterically and expressed in modern language, will be found to be quite as scientific as much of what now passes current as the final word of recent discovery. The only difference between the two schemes is that the Puranas, giving as much and perhaps more attention to the causes than to the effects, allude to the pre-cosmic and pre-genetic periods, rather than to those of so-called creation, whereas the Bible, saying only a few words of the former period, plunges forthwith into material Genesis, and while nearly skipping the pre-Adamic races, proceeds with its allegories concerning the fifth race. Now, whatever the onslaught made on the order of creation in Genesis, and its dead letter account certainly lends itself admirably to criticism. We have covered that extensively, but let's check the footnote. Mr. Gladstone's unfortunate attempt to reconcile the genetic account with science, see 19th century Dawn of Creation and Proem to Genesis, 1886, has brought upon him the Jovian thunderbolt hurled by Mr. Huxley. The dead letter account warranted no such attempt, and his fourfold order, or division of animated creation, has turned into the stone which, instead of killing the fly on the sleeping friend's brow, killed the man instead. Mr. Gladstone killed Genesis forever. But this does not prove that there is no esotericism in the latter. The fact that the Jews and all the Christians, the modern as well as the early sects, have accepted the narrative literally for 2,000 years shows only their ignorance, and shows the great ingenuity and constructive ability of the initiated rabbis who have built the two accounts, the Elohistic and the Jehovistic, esoterically, and have purposely confused the meaning by the vowelless glyphs or word signs in the original text. The 6 days, Yom, of creation, do mean 6 periods of evolution, and the 7th, that of culmination of perfection, not of rest, and refer to the 7 rounds and the 7 races with a distinct creation in each, though the use of the word boker, dawn or morning, and krib, evening twilight, which have esoterically the same meaning as sandhya, twilight in Sanskrit, have led to a charge of the most crass ignorance of the order of evolution. And here we're going to see one of those things that stands out to me and other people probably miss, right? There's a lot of those things apparently. What is being said here is that Genesis is a repetition of the creation story from the Hindus. That has been a repeated pattern as we've gone through this study. But did you notice the incongruity in this? How about the fact that in the Puranas and the Rig Veda and so on, we're in the fifth round, right? This is the 5th race, the 5th round of existence. But in Genesis, which is saying it's the same thing, it's 7 rounds and 7 races. And so that is completion, it has been completed in Genesis, whereas it is not complete in the Puranas. Well, that is a significant deviation. Well, you are intimating that despite the fact that there is really no reason to believe it, this first week, which again I do not hold in credit that it was 7 days, was an allegory for these 7 generations. And that's fine, but that's adding 2 generations to what you already believe. Now, I don't believe either one of these 2 accounts to be completely factually accurate for reasons that we have talked about several times. The main one being that nobody was here at creation, right? If you have a spiritual revelation, and I have, and you accept that as fact, and I have, does not mean that it is fact. It means that you had a spiritual revelation, and it could be true, or it could be completely a figment of your imagination. And so, while we do have an account of the creation, it was pretty certainly not by somebody who was actually there. And it was relayed at best many generations later because writing did not come out immediately, or it was somebody ruminating on what they thought that the beginning was. Because despite what other people may think, just because people were archaic does not mean that they didn't have the capacity to think. They may not have had the experience with it that we do, but they had the ability to ponder things. That is quite evident in the book of Job, which does not belong in the Old Testament whatsoever, but whatever. It is important to understand that humanity has changed some. There are technological advances. We have built upon knowledge. But the fundamentals of how we think have remained fairly constant, and the variation within the species, that some people are a little bit more on the introspective side than others, right? Some people think more than other people do, because that is a fact that has always been a thing. What we have, in the worst possible light, I will go ahead and say that, right, is that somebody 100 years, 500 years, 2,000 years after creation sat down and thought about what they thought that creation would have been. And because of that, they wrote it down. It does not mean it's correct. It means it is a speculation. It could be correct. There is no way to verify that. Added to that is that several of these things put out completely fantastical interpretations of things, which we have dealt with quite in detail in this study, so I'm not going to dig into those details now, but many of the pieces are incongruous with each other. This is one of those examples, right? This is saying that the Genesis account is fully 2 cycles ahead of what you consider to be the current cycle, right? Not back when the Bible was written, they were in the 5th cycle, and now we're in the 7th. They were in the 5th, and we are still in the 5th, awaiting the 6th. We're not even there yet. It is still in the future. And so this does not comport with what she is trying to say, right? This is meant to be a confirmation of the rounds, but instead, it is kind of a contradiction of that thought. And if you don't agree with that, drop it in the comments down below, and if it remains respectful, we can discuss it. Back to the text. Certainly lends itself admirably to criticism. He who reads the Hindu Puranas, its allegorical exaggerations notwithstanding, will find them quite in accordance with physical science. And that is true, because some things are real, right? Just because you speculate on the origins of matter doesn't mean that matter doesn't exist. Even what appears to be on the face of it, perfectly nonsensical allegory of Brahma assuming the form of a boar to rescue the earth from under the waters, finds in the secret commentaries a perfectly scientific explanation, relating as it does to the many risings and sinkings and the constant alternation of water and land from the earliest to the latest geological periods of our globe. And once again, I am going to point you to the 12,000-year disaster cycle, because this particular part is one of the things that I believe. It is probably true. There are scientific reasons to believe that it is true, but it is still in the realm of speculation until it has been proven to be true. Right? I do believe that this is a thing. I do believe that we are imminently upon it. It may even be the 6th round. But, again, there is no way to prove any of those particular points until the actual event happens. There are significant reasons to believe that it will happen and that it has happened. But despite the fact that there are significant evidences proving that it has happened in the past, we cannot prove empirically that it has fully happened in the way that is fully described in the 12,000 year disaster cycle. It could be a variation of that. I could be completely wrong, right? These are things that we will not know for a while. Now, that while is not nearly as far off as it probably was, right? And it may be tomorrow. It may be 20 years from now. It may be 200 years from now. I do believe that it is coming. And so this is confirmation bias. According to the 12,000 year disaster cycle, this part is right? Doesn't mean that the rest of it is right if a part of it is right. There can be truth contained within a lie. And that's not even to say that she is lying. She can be genuinely misbelieving or misunderstanding something. She can be genuinely led down the wrong path, right? Those things can happen. There can be honest mistakes as opposed to lies. Let's get back to the text. For science teaches us now that 9/10 of the stratified formations of the Earth's crust have been gradually constructed beneath water at the bottom of the seas. The ancient Aryans are credited with having known nothing whatever of natural history, geology, and so on. The Jewish race is, on the other hand, proclaimed by even its severest critics, an uncompromising opponent of the Bible, see Modern Science and Modern Thought, to have merit of having conceived the idea of monotheism earlier and retained it more firmly than any of the less philosophical and more immoral religions of the ancient world. Only, while we find in biblical esotericism physiological sexual mysteries symbolized, and very little more, something for which very little real philosophy is requisite, in the Puranas one may find the most scientific and philosophical dawn of creation, which, if impartially analyzed and rendered into plain language from its fairy tale-like allegories, would show that modern zoology, geology, astronomy, and nearly all the branches of modern knowledge have been anticipated in the ancient science, and were known to the philosophers in their general features, if not in such detail as at present. Puranic astronomy, with all its deliberate concealment and confusion for the purpose of leading the profane off the real track, was even shown by Bentley to be a real science. And those who are versed in the mysteries of Hindu astronomical treatises will prove that the modern theories of the progressive condensation of nebulae, nebulous stars, and suns, with the most minute details about the cyclic process of asterisms, as far more correct than Europeans have even now, for chronological and other purposes, were known in India to perfection. That's a big word. Perfection is a big word. If we turn to geology and zoology, we find the same. What are all the myths and endless genealogies of the 7 Prajapati and their sons, the 7 Rishis or Manus, and of their wives, sons, and progeny, but a vast, detailed account of the progressive development and evolution of animal creation, one species after the other? Were the highly philosophical and metaphysical Aryans the authors of the most perfect philosophical systems of transcendental psychology, of codes of ethics and such grammar as Panini's, of the Sankhya and Vedanta systems, and a moral code, Buddhism, proclaimed by Max Muller the most perfect on earth? Such fools, or children, as to lose their time in writing fairy tales? Such tales as the Puranas now seem to be in the eyes of those who have not the remotest idea of their secret meaning? What is the fable, the genealogy and origin of the Kasyapa, with his 12 wives, by whom he had a numerous and diversified progeny of nagas, serpents, reptiles, birds, and all kinds of living things, and who was thus the father of all kinds of animals, but a veiled record of the order of evolution in this round. So far, we do not see that any Orientalist ever had the remotest conception of the truths concealed under the allegories and personifications. The Satapatha Brahmana, says one, gives a not very intelligible account of Kasyap's origin. He was the son of Marichi, the son of Brahma, the father of Vivasavat, the father of Manu, the progenitor of mankind. Having assumed the form of a tortoise, Prajapati created offspring. That which he created he made akarut, hence the word karma, tortoise. Kasyapa means tortoise, hence men say all creatures are descendants of Kasyapa, etc., etc. He was all this. He was also the father of Garuda, the bird, the king of the feathered tribe, who descends from and is of one stock with the reptiles, the Nagas, and who becomes their mortal enemy subsequently, as he is also a cycle, a period of time, when in the course of evolution the birds which developed from reptiles in their struggle for life, struggle of the fittest, etc., etc., turned in preference on those they issued from to devour them, perhaps prompted by natural law in order to make room for other and more perfect species. In that admirable epitome of modern science and modern thought, a lesson in natural history is offered by Mr. Gladstone, showing the utter variance with it of the Bible. The author remarks that geology, commencing with the earliest known fossil, the Izun Canadese of the Laurentian, continued in a chain, every link of which is firmly welded through the Silurian with its abundance of molluscous, crustacean, and vermiform life, and first indication of fishes, the Devonian with its predominance of fish and first appearance of reptiles, the Mesozoic with its Bactrians, or frog family, the secondary formations in which reptiles of the sea, land, and air preponderated, and the first humble forms of vertebrate land animals began to appear. And finally, the tertiary, in which mammalian life has become abundant, and type succeeding to type and species to species are gradually differentiated and specialized through the Eocene, Miocene, Pliocene periods until we arrive at the glacial and prehistoric periods, and at positive proof of the existence of man. The same order, plus the descriptions of animals unknown to modern science, is found in the commentaries on the Puranas in general, and in the Book of Dizan especially. The only difference, a grave one no doubt, as implying a spiritual and divine nature of man independent of his physical body in this illusionary world, in which the false personality and its cerebral basis alone is known to orthodox psychology, is as follows. Having been in all these so-called seven creations, allegorizing the seven evolutionary changes, or the sub-races we may call them, of the first root race of mankind, man was on earth in this round from the beginning, having passed through all the kingdoms of nature in the previous 3 rounds. Footnote. Follow the law of analogy, the masters teach. Atma Buddhi is dual and Manas is triple, inasmuch as the former has 2 aspects and the latter 3. An example as a principle per se, which gravitates in its higher aspect to Atma Buddhi, and follows in its lower nature, Kama, the seat of terrestrial and animal desires and passions. Now, compare the evolution of the races, the first and the second of which are the nature of Atma Buddhi, their passive spiritual progeny, and the third root race shows 3 distinct divisions or aspects physiologically and cyclically. The earliest, sinless, the middle portions awakening to intelligence, and the third and lastly, decidedly animal. An example, Manas succumbs to the temptations of Kama. in the previous 3 rounds. His physical frame, one adapted to the thermal conditions of those earlier periods, was ready to receive the divine pilgrim at the first dawn of human life, in example 18 million years ago. It is only at the midpoint of the third root race that man was endowed with manas. Once united, the 2 and then the 3 made 1. For, though the lower animals, from the amoeba to man, received their monads, in which all the higher qualities are potential, all have to remain dormant till each reaches its human form, before which stage manas, mind, has no development in them. Footnote. Men are made complete only during their third, towards the 4th cycle, race. They are made gods for good and evil, and responsible only when the 2 arcs meet, after 3.5 rounds towards the 5th race. They are made so by the Nirmanakaya, spiritual or astral remains, of the Rudra Kamaras, cursed to be reborn again on earth again, meaning doomed in their natural turn to reincarnation in the higher ascending arc of the terrestrial cycle. 2 points of note: you are not cursed to be reborn. Right? This is a voluntary incarnation. That is a direct revelation. You do not have to believe it. And this is, again, pointing out the thing that I pointed out earlier about not being consistent, right? Claiming that the 7th round in the other one, and now we are in the 4th round, 3.5 way through to the 5th, right? That's just talking about what I talked about earlier. In the animals, every principle is paralyzed and in a fetus-like state, save the 2nd, vital, and the 3rd, the astral. And the rudiments of the 4th, which is desire, instinct, whose intensity and development varies and changes with the species. To the materialist wedded to the Darwinian theory, this will read like a fairy tale, a mystification. To the believer in the inner spiritual man, the statement will have nothing unnatural in it. Now, the writer is certain to meet what will be termed insuperable objections. We shall be told that the line of embryology, the gradual development of every individual life, and the progress of what is known to take place in the order of progressive stages of specialization, that all this is opposed to the idea of man preceding mammals. Man begins as the humblest and most primitive vermiform creature. If you don't know what vermiform is, that is a worm. From the primitive speck of protoplasm and the nucleated cell in which all life originates, and is developed through stages indistinguishable from those of fish, reptile, and mammals, until a cell finally attains the highly specialized development of the quadriluminous, and last of all, of the human type. Lane 335. This is perfectly scientific, and we have nothing against that, for all this relates to the shell of man, his body, which in its growth is subject, of course, like every other, once called, morphological unit, to such metamorphoses. It is not those who teach the transformation of the mineral atom through crystallization, which is the same function, and bears the same relation to its inorganic, so-called, upadi, or basis, as the formation of cells to their organic nuclei. Through plant, insect, and animal into man, it is not they who will reject this theory, as it will finally lead to the recognition of a universal deity in nature, ever present and as ever invisible and unknowable, and of intracosmic gods, who were all men. Footnote 2. And before we get to the footnote, I'm going to point out that I read chapter 1 today of my video, or my book. It is going to be up, and we are discussing the divine. Footnote 2. The whole trouble is this. Neither physiologist nor pathologist will recognize that the cell-germinating substance, the cytoblastema, and the mother lie from which crystals originate are one and the same essence, save in differentiation for purposes, and we dealt a good bit with differentiation. But we would ask, what does science and its exact and now axiomatic discoveries prove against our occult theory? Those who believe in the law of evolution and gradual progressive development from a cell, which from a vital has become a morphological cell, until it awoke as protoplasm pure and simple, these can surely never limit their belief to one line of evolution. The types of life are innumerable, and the progress of evolution, moreover, does not go at the same rate in every kind of species. The constitution of primordial matter in the Silurian age, we mean primordial matter of science, is the same in every essential particular, save its degree of present grossness as the primordial living matter of today. Again, see Chapter 1. Nor do we find that which ought to be found if the now orthodox theory of evolution were quite correct, namely, a constant, ever-flowing progress of every species of being. Instead of that, what does one see? While the intermediate groups of animal being all tend towards a higher type, and while specializations, now of one type and now of another, develop through the geological ages, change forms, assume new shapes, appear and disappear with a kaleidoscopic rapidity. In the description of paleontologists from one period to another, the two solitary exceptions to the general rule are those at the two opposite poles of life and type, namely, man and the lower genera of being. Certain well-marked forms of living beings have existed through enormous epochs, surviving not only the changes of physical conditions, but persisting comparatively unaltered. While other forms of life have appeared and disappeared, such forms may be termed persistent types of life, and examples of them are abundant enough in both the animal and vegetable worlds. Yeah, that's true, right? Like alligators and crocodiles are, sturgeons, they are. There are many examples of things that have existed at least from the last epoch. Nevertheless, we are not given any good reason why Darwin links together reptiles, birds, amphibians, fishes, mollusca, etc., as offshoots of moneric ancestry. Nor are we told whether reptiles, for instance, are direct descendants of the amphibian, the latter of fishes, and fishes of lower forms, which they certainly are. For the monads have passed through all these forms of being up to man on every planet in the three preceding rounds, every round as well as every subsequent globe, from A to G, having been and still having to be the arena of the same evolution, only repeated each time on a more solid material basis. Therefore, the question, what relation is there between the third round astral prototypes and ordinary physical development in the course of the origination of pre-mammalian organic species? Is easily answered. One is the shadowy prototype of the other, the preliminary, hardly defined, and evanescent sketch on the canvas of objects, which are destined to receive the final and vivid form under the brush of the painter. The fish evolved into an amphibian, a frog, in the shadows of ponds, and man passed through all of his metamorphoses on this globe in the third round as he did in this, his fourth cycle. The third round types contributed to the formation of the types in this one. On strict analogy, the cycle of the 7 rounds and their work of the gradual formation of man through every kingdom of nature are repeated on a microscopical scale in the first 7 months of gestation of a future human being. Let the student think over and work out this analogy. As the 7 months old unborn baby, though quite ready, yet needs 2 months more in which to acquire strength and consolidate, so man, having perfected his evolution during 7 rounds, remains 2 more periods in the womb of Mother Nature before he is born, or rather reborn as Dione, still more perfect than he was before he launched forth as a monad on the newly built chain of worlds. Let the student ponder over this mystery, and then he will easily convince himself that, as there are also physical links between many classes, so there are precise domains wherein the astral merges into physical evolution. Of this, science breathes not one word. Man is evolved with and from the monkey, it says. But now see the contradiction. Huxley proceeds to point out plants, ferns, club mosses, and some of them generically identical with those now living, which are met with in the Carboniferous epoch. 4. The cone of the Oolitic Araucaria is hardly distinguishable from that of existing species. Subkingdoms of animals yield the same instances. The Globigerina of the Atlantic surroundings is identical with the Cretaceous species of the same genus. The tabulate corals of the Silurian epoch are wonderfully like the millipores of our own seas. The Arachnida, the highest group of which, the scorpions, is represented in the coal by a genus differing only from its living congeners, only in the eyes, etc., etc., all of which may be closed with Dr. Carpenter's authoritative statement about the Foraminifera. There is no evidence, he says, of any fundamental modification or advance in the foraminiferous type from the Paleozoic period to the present time. The foraminiferous fauna of our own species probably present a greater range and variety than existed at any previous period, but there is no indication of any tendency to elevation towards a higher type. Now, if there is no indication of change in the Foraminifera, a protozoan of the lowest type of life, mouthless and eyeless, except its greater variety now than before, man, who is on the uppermost rung of the ladder of being, indicates still less change, as we have seen, the skeleton of his Paleolithic ancestor being even found superior in some respects to his present frame. Where is, then, the claimed uniformity of law, the absolute rule for one species shading off into another, and, by insensible gradations, into higher types? And once again, we will point out the fact that macroevolution does not work, but microevolution does. We see Sir William Thomson admitting as much as 40 millions of years in the Earth's history, since the surface of the globe became sufficiently cool to permit the presence of living things. And during that enormous lapse of time in the Oolitic period alone, the so-called Age of Reptiles, we find a most extraordinary variety and abundance of saurian forms, the amphibian type reaching its highest developments. We learn of ichthyosauri and plesiosauri in the lakes and rivers, and of winged crocodiles or lizards flying in the air. After which, in the Tertiary period, we find the mammalian type exhibiting remarkable divergences from previously existing forms. Mastodons, megatheriums, and other unwieldy denizens of the ancient forest and plains, and subsequently are notified of the gradual modification of one of the ramifications of the quadriruminous order into those beings of whom primeval man himself may claim to have been evolved, the beginnings of life. He may, but no one, except materialist, can see why he should, as there is not the slightest necessity for it, nor is such an evolution warranted by facts, for those most interested in the proofs thereof confess their utter failure to find one single fact to support their theory. There is no need for the numberless types of life to represent the members of one progressive series. They are the products of various and different evolutional divergences, taking place now in one direction and now in another. Therefore, it is far more justifiable to say that the monkey evolved into the quadriruminous order than that primeval man, who has remained stationary in his human specialization ever since his fossil is found in the oldest strata, and of whom no variety is found save in color and facial type, has developed from a common ancestor together with the ape. That man originates like other animals in a cell and develops through stages undistinguishable from those of fish, reptile, and mammal, until the cell attains the highly specialized development of the quadriruminous, and at last the human type, is an occult axiom thousands of years old. The Kabbalistic axiom, a stone becomes a plant a beast a man a god, holds good throughout the ages. You never become a god. Haeckel, in his Shop Fungus Sheet, shows a double drawing representing two embryos, that of a dog, 6 weeks old, and that of a man, 8 weeks. The two, except a slight difference in the head, larger and wider about the brain in the man, are undistinguishable. In fact, we may say that every human being passes through the stage of fish and reptile before arriving at that of mammal and finally of man. If we take him up at the more advanced stage, where the embryo has already passed the reptilian form for a considerable time, the line of development remains the same as that of other mammalia. The rudimentary limbs are exactly similar, the 5 fingers and toes develop in the same way, and the resemblance after the first 4 weeks' growth between the embryo of a man and a dog is such that it is scarcely possible to distinguish them. Even at the age of 8 weeks, the embryo man is an animal with a tail, hardly to be distinguished from an embryo puppy. Modern Science, page 171. Why then not make man and dog evolve from a common ancestor, or from a reptile, a naga, instead of coupling man with the quadrurumina? This would be just as logical as the other, and more so. The shape and stages of the human embryo have not changed since historical times, and these metamorphoses, as known to Asclepius and Hippocrates, as well as to Mr. Huxley. Therefore, since the Kabbalist has remarked it since prehistoric times, it is no new discovery. In Isis, Volume 1, 389, it is noticed and half explained. We have done the entirety of Isis Unveiled. As the embryo of man has no more of the ape in it than any other mammal, but contains in itself the totality of the kingdoms of nature, and since it seems to be a persistent type of life, far more so than even the foraminifera, it seems as illogical to make him evolve from the ape as it would be to trace his origin to the frog or the dog. Both occult and Eastern philosophies believe in evolution, which Manu and Kapila, footnote. Hence the philosophy and the allegory of the 7, 10, and finally 21 Prajapatis, Rishis, Munis, etc., who were all made the fathers of various things and beings. The order of the 7 classes, or orders of plants, animals, and even inanimate things, given at random in the Puranas, is found in several commentaries in the correct rotation. Thus, Prithu is the father of the earth. He milks her, and makes her bear every kind of grain and vegetable, all enumerated and specified. Kasyapa is the father of all the reptiles, snakes, demons, etc., which Manu and Kapila give with far more clearness than any scientist does at present. No need to repeat that which was fully debated in Isis Unveiled, as the reader may find all these arguments and the description of the basis on which all the Eastern doctrines of evolution rested in our earlier books. Footnote 2 is see Volume 1, Exceeding Up the Tree of Evolution, the Mundane Tree. Again, we have read through the entirety of Isis Unveiled. It is available in this playlist. But no occultist can accept the unreasonable proposition that all the now existing forms, from the structureless amoeba to man, are the direct lineal descendants of organisms which lived millions and millions of years before the birth of man in the pre-Silurian epochs in the sea or land mud. The occultists believe in an inherent law of progressive development. Footnote. Checked and modified, however, by the law of retardation, which imposes a restriction on the advance of all species when a higher type makes its appearance. Yeah, I don't believe that. There is progressive development. I have my own theory of spiritual evolution, which is in Chapter 1, which we recorded today. Mr. Darwin never did, and says so himself. On page 145 of Origin of the Species, we find him stating that, since there can be no advantage to the infusorian animalcule or an intestinal worm to become highly organized, Therefore, natural selection, not including necessarily progressive development, leaves the animalcule and the worm, the persistent types, quiet. There does not appear much uniform law in such behavior of nature, and it looks more like the discriminative action of some supernatural selection. Perhaps that aspect of karma, which Eastern occultists would call the law of retardation, may have something to do with it. That is not one of the laws of creation. But there is every reason to doubt whether Mr. Darwin himself ever gave such an importance to his law, as is given to it now by his atheistic followers. The knowledge of the various living forms in the geological periods that have gone by is very meager. The reasons given for this by Dr. Bastian are very suggestive. 1. On account of the imperfect manner in which the several forms may be represented in the strata pertaining to the period. 2. On account of the extremely limited nature of the explorations which have been made in these imperfectly representative strata. And 3. Because of so many parts of the record are absolutely inaccessible to us, beneath nearly all beneath the Silurian system having been blotted out by time, whilst those 2/3 of the Earth's surface in which the remaining strata are to be found are now covered over by seas. Hence, Mr. Darwin says himself, "For my part, following out Lyell's metaphor, I look at the geological record as a history of the world imperfectly kept, and written in a changing dialect. Of this history we possess the last volume alone, relating only to 2 or 3 countries. Of this volume, only here and there a short chapter has been preserved, and of each page, only here and there a few lines. It is not on such meager data, certainly not the last word of science can be said, nor is it on any ground of human pride or unreasonable belief in man's representing even here on earth, in our period perhaps, the highest type of life, that occultism denies that all the preceding forms of human life belong to types lower than our own, for it is not so, but simply because the missing link, such as to prove the existing theory undeniably, will never be found by paleontologists. Believing, as we do, that man has evolved from and passed through, during the preceding rounds, the lowest forms of every life, vegetable and animal, on earth, there is nothing very degrading in the idea of having the orangutan as an ancestor of our physical form. Quite the reverse, as it would forward the occult doctrine with regard to the final evolution of everything in terrestrial nature into man, most irresistibly. One may even inquire how it is that biologists and anthropologists, having once firmly accepted the theory of the descent of man from the ape, how is it that they have hitherto left untouched the future evolution of the existing apes into man? There is only a logical sequence of the first theory, unless science would make of man a privileged being, and his evolution a non-precedent in nature, quite a special and unique case. And that is what all this leads physical science to. The reason, however, why the occultists reject the Darwinian, and especially the Haeckel'ian, hypotheses is because it is the ape which is, in sober truth, a special and unique instance, not man. The Pithecoid is an accidental creation, a forced growth, the result of an unnatural process. The occult doctrine is, we think, more logical. It teaches a cyclic, never-varying law in nature, the latter having no personal, special design, but acting on a uniform plan that prevails through the whole Manvantaric period, and deals with the landworm as it deals with man. And again, you are contradicting yourself. You just said that man is the highest evolutionary form, and that all things are going towards that. That would be a special design. That would be a special design. If everything is intended to go from plant to animal to human, that is a special design. If it is acting in accordance with this design, it is acting in accordance with a special design. I don't understand why that is even hard to conceive of. Neither the one nor the other have sought to come into being, hence both are under the same evolutionary law. And both have to progress according to karmic law. Both have started from the same neutral center of life, and both have to reemerge into it at the consummation of the cycle. It is not denied that in the preceding round, man was a gigantic ape-like creature, and when we say man, we ought to perhaps to say the rough mold that was developing for the use of man in this round only, the middle or the transition point of which we have hardly reached. Remember, that's 5, not 7. Nor was man what he is now during the first 2.5 root races. That point he reached, as said before, only 18 million years ago, during the secondary period, as we claim. Till then, he was, according to tradition and occult teaching, a god on earth who had fallen into matter, or generation. This may or may not be accepted, since the secret doctrine does not impose itself as an infallible dogma, and since, whether its prehistoric records are accepted or rejected, it has nothing to do with the question of the actual man and his inner nature, the fall, mentioned above, having left no original sin on humanity. But all this has been sufficiently dealt with. Furthermore, we are taught that the transformations through which man passed on the descending arc, which is centrifugal for spirit and centripetal for matter, and those he prepares to go through, henceforward, on his ascending path, which will reverse the direction of the two forces, vis-a-vis. Matter will become centrifugal and spirit centripetal. That all such transformations are next in store for the anthropoid ape also, all those, at any rate, who have reached the remove next to man in this round, and these will all be men in the 5th round, as present men inhabited ape-like forms in the 3rd, the preceding round. Behold, then, in the modernized denizens of the great forest of Sumatra, the degraded and dwarfed examples, blurred copies, as Mr. Huxley has it, of ourselves. As we, the majority of mankind, were in the earliest sub-races of the 4th root race, during the period of what is called the fall into generation. The ape, we know, is not the product of natural evolution, but an accident, a crossbreed between an animal being, or form, and man. Okay, once again, we will point out that this is a physical impossibility. As far as I am aware, and I'm only aware of this because of a specific law in Louisiana, the only animal that you can physically impregnate is a sheep, right? You can do that, and they can impregnate a female human. That is a thing. But that is the only instance that I am aware of where humans can physically impregnate any other animal. You should not have sex with any animal. That should go without saying, but it probably doesn't. You should not have sex with any animal other than a human. You should not have any sexual relations whatsoever with an animal other than a human, even though there will be no progeny from it. Back to the text. As has been shown in the present volume, Anthropogenesis, it is the speechless animal that first started sexual connection, having been the first to separate into males and females. Nor was it intended by nature that man should follow the bestial example, as shown by the comparatively painless procreation of their species by the animals, and the terrible suffering and danger of the same in the woman. The ape is, indeed, as remarked in Nisus Unveiled, a transformation of species most directly connected with that of the human family, a hybrid branch engrafted on their own stock before the final perfection of the latter, or man. The apes are millions of years later than the speaking human being, and are the latest contemporaries of our 5th race. I am fairly certain that the geological and the fossil record have proven that to be untrue. Thus, it is most important to remember that the egos of the apes are entities compelled by their karma to incarnate in the animal forms, which resulted from the bestiality of the latest third and the earliest fourth race men. They are entities who had already reached the human stage before this round. Consequently, they form an exception to the general rule. The numberless traditions about satyrs are no fables, but represent an extinct race of animal men. The animal Eves were their foremothers, and the human Adams their forefathers. Hence, the Kabbalistic allegory of Lilith, or Lilatu, Adam's first wife, whom the Talmud describes as a charming woman with long wavy hair. In example, a female hairy animal of a character still unknown, still a female animal, who in the Kabbalistic and Talmudic allegories is called the female reflection of Samael, Lilith, or man-animal united, a being called Hayobiskat, the beast or evil beast, Zohar. It is from this unnatural union that the present apes descended. The latter are truly speechless men, and will become speaking animals, or men of a lower order, in the fifth round, while the adepts of a certain school hope that some of the egos of the apes of a higher intelligence will reappear at the close of the sixth root race. What their form will be is of secondary consideration. The form means nothing. Species and genera of the flora, fauna, and the highest animals, its crown, man, change and vary according to the environments and climatic variations, not only with every round, but every root race likewise, as well as after every geological cataclysm that puts an end to or produces a turning point in the latter. In the sixth root race, the fossils of the orang, the gorilla, and the chimpanzee will be those of extinct quadrominous mammals, and new forms, though fewer and even ever wider apart as ages pass on and the close of the Manvantara approaches, will develop from the cast-off types of the human races as they revert once again to astral, out of the mire of the physical life. There were none before man, and they will be extinct before the seventh race develops. Karma will lead on the monads of the unprogressed men of our race and lodge them in the newly evolved human frames of the thus physiologically regenerated baboon. This will take place, of course, millions of years hence, but the picture of this cyclic procession of all that lives and breathes now on earth, each species in its turn, is a true one, and needs no special creation or miraculous formation of man, beast, and plant ex nihilo. This is how occult science explains the absence of any link between ape and man, and shows the former evolving from the latter. And that is going to bring us to the end of Archaic Teachings in the Puranas and Genesis. Now, I have stated numerous times that microevolution works, macroevolution does not. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of somewhat difficult topics. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. I have another explanation on why there is no missing link, and that is spontaneous mutation of the genes due to an external event. I believe that there was a solar radiation event. It doesn't necessarily have to have come from the sun, but that is the most likely place that it could have come from, and that it affected the planet in its totality, that every single species was changed a little bit at the exact same time, and some of those were changed into us at the exact same time. It does not work on a slow, gradual pace. The only way that it can work is if there is a spontaneous mutation at the same time within the species, changing the species, so that every progeny that comes out now looks like the new species. Otherwise, the selection is never going to take place. We've talked about that several times, and so I don't really have to expound upon it here. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that was said. Put it in the box down below, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see discussed or simply read aloud, drop that in the comments down below as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks, with a membership, or check out my book, which is linked down below. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.